From courtside the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast, a weekly show for basketball gamers and hardcore hoopheads. Andrew with you once again, joined as always by my co-host Derek, aka D for 3. Derek, it's come time to talk about our hopes and dreams for the future of NBA 2K, our fondest wishes as we anticipate a new release, if you will. So please, tip us off.
Yeah, our main topic today is NBA 2K27, what we would like to see for improvements over 2K26, and what we know about it at this time. However, first, Andrew, we would like to say rest in peace to Stacey King, who passed away due to complications related to a fall in his home. Three-time NBA champion with the Chicago Bulls, 20 years of color commentary with the Bulls, a true fan favorite, and one of your favorites as well, Andrew. This is a tough loss.
Yeah, that was some heartbreaking news to see overnight here in Australia. You know, rest in peace, Stacey King. Horrible news, horrible to hear how it happened, a fall in his home. And, you know, King, a standout player at Oklahoma, a 2010 player in college, drafted by the Bulls in 1989, becoming that valuable contributor off the bench during that first three-peat. Traded for Luke Longley, brought an Australian to the Bulls. So, you know, lots of connections there. And later becoming that great analyst and commentator for the Bulls for 20 years, as you said, bringing that excitement to every broadcast. You know, you think of Marv Albert being the voice of the NBA as we grew up watching basketball, Derek. And Stacey King was the voice of the Derrick Rose era for the Bulls. I know he was commentating before and after that, but he made the first very exciting era since the championship years even more exciting with his enthusiasm, his calls, the way he'd punctuate everyone's highlights, of course, but certainly so many Derrick Rose dunks and other fantastic plays. Yeah, brought so much to the booth. And from all accounts, a great guy. You know, you hear stories of him hanging around to meet fans, longtime fans, new fans after the games. You know, Derek, part of me wished that someday I'll get over there, catch a Bulls game live, and maybe meet him. Obviously, sadly, no longer possible. But from all accounts, an absolutely great person, successful career, fantastic commentator. Yeah, this one definitely hurts as a Bulls fan.
When you watch a team growing up and as a young adult, especially if it's the local broadcast of your favorite team, the commentary team can feel like family. In my case, the crew was Tom Heinsohn and Mike Gorman for the Celtics. Tom Heinsohn was the color guy for all of my years watching the Boston Celtics. He passed away on November 9th, 2020. What a sad day in my house when that happened, because for so many years he felt like family. He brought the excitement to the broadcasts. He was a huge fan of the team that he was providing commentary on, and that's a big deal, as you know, Andrew, right? Because they have that true passion for the team. Both Tom Heinsohn and Stacey King played for the teams they were commentating for. Right, Tom Heinsohn, a legendary Celtics player, a number of championships and whatnot, a Hall of Famer. So I know what you're going through as a Chicago Bulls fan because I went through that, right, with Tom Heinsohn. And yeah, like I said, they can feel like family, so it's so tough.
It's just that constant when you're watching the games. You invite them into your home, to your point. You know, and it does make those games feel familiar, feel warm. You have the excitement. You know, sometimes those analysts, those commentators can be a bit biased, obviously, but when you are a fan of the team, it's usually a lot more palatable. And I think both Tommy Heinsohn and Stacey King just loved their teams, just loved supporting their teams, and certainly loved basketball. So, yeah, huge loss.
Yeah, and our thoughts are also with Stacey King's family. And, you know, for anybody that listens to the show, that was a fan of him and his commentary. Yeah, you know, we do feel what you're going through right now. So, Andrew, let's talk about NBA 2K27. We learned a few details. Victor Wembanyama will be the cover athlete for the Standard Edition, and the game releases on September 4th, with early access taking place on August 28th. Andrew, I fully expect the Legend Edition cover to be Tim Duncan, or a combination of Tim Duncan and David Robinson. If it were me, that's what I would do. I would make it a combo, both players featured. And I wouldn't be surprised if Paige Beckers gets the WNBA edition cover, as the Dallas Wings are located in Texas, and it would allow them to keep that theme by doing a Texas trifecta of cover athletes or 4 cover athletes if David Robinson is included. What do you think about Victor Wembanyama as a choice and my ideas for the other cover athletes?
Certainly think it makes sense. He is very rapidly becoming one of the faces of the NBA. Obviously, the Spurs have had this fantastic season. As we record this, the Knicks are up 2-0 in the NBA Finals. But I think, win or lose, the Spurs have a bright future. Wemby has a bright future. He is a star, really gaining in popularity, becoming one of the faces of the league, as I said. So it definitely makes sense. You want to have these top players on the cover. Paige Beckers also makes sense for the WNBA edition. Tim Duncan appearing on the NBA Live 2000 cover, really cool to see him on a cover again. And with David Robinson, it would certainly be that great throwback to the Spurs' first championship. It would be even more appropriate if the Spurs do come back and win this series. My apologies to Mike, MP3, and Jeff X, some of the biggest Knicks fans in our community, obviously. But that does make sense. And I also think it's cool when they can have a recurring theme across all of their covers like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it makes it extra special. I personally will be getting the game on August 28th, and we'll share some early footage with folks on YouTube and other social media platforms, just like I did with NBA 2K26. You think you'll do that this year, Andrew? Do you think that you're going to try to get the game early? Or do you think, hey, you know what? I haven't liked this generation of 2Ks. I'm just going to wait until September 4th.
I was thinking about that while I was preparing my notes for this week's show. And I'm not sure, to be honest, because as a content creator, doing this show with you, I do feel that compulsion, as I did last year, to at least consider getting that edition that gives me access, that gives me early access to the game, so that I can talk about it, share footage, share those impressions at the same time that you do. But with that being said, I haven't enjoyed this generation of NBA 2Ks. It is difficult for me to justify buying that special edition, putting out that extra money for a game that I'm not sure I'm actually going to enjoy. I know it's kind of an investment, I suppose, as a content creator. These are the things that you have to do, so I won't rule it out. I'm certainly thinking about it still, but it's hard.
Yeah, and that's understandable. I also want to let people know that there was another detail that we learned, but that we kind of expected, that NBA 2K27 will not be released on PS4 or Xbox One. So no more last-gen versions of the newest 2Ks. I'm surprised it went this long, where we were getting the last-gen versions of the games. But I am curious to see how much this would hurt their sales, because I do still believe that there's a lot of people on PS4 and Xbox One.
Same. And I've seen some people on Reddit mostly, not surprisingly, celebrating that announcement, saying it's about time, great. And I see where they're coming from, I suppose. At a certain point, you do have to leave that generation behind, but the generation gaps don't feel as big as they used to. Moreover, producing that last-gen version didn't hurt the next-gen version, or the current-gen version, I suppose, the new-gen version, in any way. There is, as we've said before, Derek, a bit of elitism when it comes to last-gen, and people still on last-gen. A lot of reasons why people are, not feeling they have to upgrade, not feeling there's a benefit to upgrading, not having the money. Money is tight these days. So I hate to see that elitism, that calling people broke, etc. Our listeners will know how much I hate that, how much you hate that, how much we think that is a really rotten attitude. But like you said, it's not surprising that we're finally getting to the end of that generation being supported. Once again, I don't think it was holding back the new-gen, current-gen version, but it has gone on, that support for last gen, a little bit longer than previous generations. And that does come down to the cross-generation progression in my team, the fact they've been able to do that, the fact there is that smaller generation gap. So, on one hand, it's not surprising that it's lasted this long, but on the other hand, it kind of is, because, we're getting close to PlayStation 6, the next Xbox, and yet 8th gen, the last generation, is still being supported, even as 10th gen is looming. So, a little surprising.
Yeah, and there's some people in the NLSC community that are still on the PS4 gen NBA 2K games. Every year they get the PS4 version. One of them is MP3. longtime listener of the show and longtime member of the community. And now I'm curious what someone, like him, what they're going to do. Is he going to now feel compelled that he has to go spend $500, $600, $700 or whatever it is now for a PS5 or Xbox Series console in order to play the newest 2K? Is he going to stick with NBA 2K26 for PS4 gen? So yeah, I'm interested to see what this does for people that want to pick up the newest 2K.
Yeah, I just had a quick look. Mike, of course, in the UK, and the digital edition of PlayStation 5 currently, after the price hike in April, is £519.99 and £569.99 for the disc edition. Premium PS5 Pro is apparently £789.99. And pounds have a higher value than both Australian and US dollars, Derek. So that is a lot of money you've got to put out to upgrade at the moment.
And that's part of the reason why the elitism is stupid, right? Because these consoles are expensive, right? And the games are expensive. And if people want to go online, sometimes they feel like they have to put more money into the game. So yeah, we don't tolerate elitism here on the NLSC podcast.
Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, nba-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at nba-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community.
So let's get into some improvements that we'd like to see for NBA 2K27. From a gameplay perspective, we're going to start out there. I want to say that I don't expect many changes from 2K26. As they announced, they implemented a new motion system with that game. So my guess is the gameplay will be incredibly similar. I'm also going to sound like a broken record here because I've been asking for some of these improvements for years, Andrew, on this show and when providing feedback elsewhere. So bear with me. So number one, improve foot planning. 2K26 still has the poor foot planning issues that have plagued the series since the launch of NBA 2K18, players sliding all over the place, floating about the court, etc., which makes the action look and feel out of control at times. It makes it so oftentimes your player is out of position, whether you are on defense or offense, and whether you have the ball or not.
Yeah, the foot planting, the overall feel of the game, has been one of the biggest turn-offs for me. I'd say that it feels both simultaneously heavy on the sticks and yet floaty at the same time. I know it's a bit of a contradiction, but it just doesn't feel right to me. And control responsiveness as well, or rather the lack thereof. The feel of the game, the player movement, is definitely one of my biggest complaints about this whole generation of NBA 2Ks.
Yeah, and before I continue, I want to let people know that I put in a lot of time in both NBA 2K26 and NBA 2K25. And as far as reported hours spent on those two games, Steam tells me that I spent over 400 hours with NBA 2K25 and over 200 hours at this point with 2K26. At the end of the day, I did get my money's worth. Most of my time playing both of these games was co-op with my two brothers in the WNBA, or using Legends, or in the case of 2K25, also doing a fantasy draft season on the NBA side and playing against each other. So keep that in mind when you hear these critiques. I didn't have the worst experience with 2K25 and 2K26, but there are things that I strongly dislike about this current motion system and just this generation of NBA 2Ks in general. So the next improvement that I would like to see is less suction and less invisible walls. 2K26 has so many artificial boosts that the action feels incredibly canned most of the time, whether it be paint and block badges that drag an offensive player into a defender or make them miss a wide-open layup just because a defender is in the vicinity, to being dragged into defenders and screens artificially, to trying to make a move or simply dribbling up the floor and hitting an invisible wall. Because of the poor foot planning, suction, and invisible walls, you find yourself fighting the game more often than your opponent, and that is a major red flag. The suction and invisible walls have also made the mid-range game almost extinct and heavily impact the post game, which includes both getting a shot off or attacking the rim from those spots.
And that's the kind of stuff that I just don't have tolerance for anymore. And you've made some great suggestions as far as combating it on the sticks, as far as adjusting the sliders. You've thrown out those slider suggestions in the forum, in our Discord. They've worked for other people, and I can see the difference myself. But again, I just don't like the feel of the game, so I haven't been able to develop that tolerance to really put up with it.
And you can't get rid of them completely, right?
True.
You can do slider tweaks, but it will never completely overhaul the game's
Exactly.
and fix those issues. And the other point of this too is most people put on these games and either don't know how to mess with sliders or don't want to mess with sliders. They just play the game by default. And there's many different modes where you can't even mess with sliders, like my team, right? So you're stuck with the default gameplay. You're stuck with the way the players are made by default and whatnot. And that can be a miserable experience if the game isn't strong mechanically with its default engine.
And the tuning, absolutely. You can't do anything in those modes. And once again, play movement and control, the suction, the field play movement on the sticks, these are the biggest things that have been holding me back from playing this generation of NBA 2Ks. I get into the game, it feels the same because it is that same engine, that same motion system. I just can't get into it. And to that point, I'm not expecting huge changes in NBA 2K27. I don't expect there to be a huge change until there is that mechanical overhaul, that engine overhaul. So I'm hoping that there is some improvement, that it is a bit more palatable to me, but I'm not expecting huge changes until they actually implement a new engine. And even then, if they design it the same way, it's going to feel very much the same. Control responsiveness. That's one of my biggest issues. We've seen so many videos, Derek, of people holding a controller up to the screen and showing how much of an input delay there is on the controller. I just can't work with that.
Yeah, my brother has complained a little bit about the input delay as well, especially as far as you try to go up and there's like a heavy animation that plays out that prevents you from completing that action, or like the ability to catch the ball and go right off of the catch, to be able to shoot right off of the catch in general. So input delay has definitely been a bigger issue on PS5 gen than it was on the prior generation. Next improvement that I'd like to see is less badges. So less badges equals more freedom and control, Andrew. I know this won't happen because badges have only grown in numbers over the years, but less badges would allow more of a true skill gap. It would allow for more control for the user. And like I said, I don't think this is going to change. I don't think we're going to see less badges. If anything, I'm guessing we would see more. But yeah, just it creates so many canned moments, and I don't think it represents skill gap.
Yeah, that is the great irony of badges. As much as people talk about the skill gap, making these skillful mechanics, the amount of badges just totally negates that. And it's somehow become a badge of honor for the game to have more badges. I know every so often they consolidate them. Every few games they'll say, we've consolidated these abilities into one, and we've replaced this one with that one that works a little bit better, supposedly. That's what they advertise in the developer blogs anyway. But they have become so reliant on those artificial boosts that it really has contributed to the ruination of the online scene and offline gameplay as well. But online, it really just has taken away the supposed skill gap because that's where everybody's trying to bring in that skill gap. It's all about online, the competitive scene, so-called elite gamers, elitist gamers, to my mind, Eric. But yeah, those badges, out of control.
Next improvement I would like to see, and I know this is a big one for you, is improved shooting mechanics. Mm-hmm. Most shooting animations feel rushed and unforgiving. Shooting in 2K26 doesn't feel like real basketball. Any semi-contested shot feels almost impossible to hit on any higher difficulty level. And shot timing has never been worse, in my opinion, than it has been in the last 3 editions of the 2K series. Shooting never really feels rewarding in 2K26, even when you make some shots. I think shooting can be a little bit more rewarding and more realistic with heavy slider tweaks. which I make for my brother and my seasons, when we're doing the WNBA or if we try to play the NBA, etc. But again, there are so many modes in NBA 2K where you can't make any slider tweaks. Playing in my career, playing in the park, playing my team, etc. So, I think shooting needs to be strong by default. And it used to be in the NBA 2K series. We've talked about it before. NBA 2K17, incredibly strong with shooting, both with the stick and with the button. NBA 2K19 isn't bad either out of the box as far as shooting the basketball. Same with games like NBA 2K14 and NBA 2K16. So I think shooting mechanics have gotten much worse on the PS5 gen than they were during the 2010s NBA 2Ks.
Oh yeah, absolutely agree. This is another one of my biggest issues with the game. One of my biggest roadblocks into getting into this generation of NBA 2Ks. Look, I don't think green or miss should be a thing. I think it is too harsh. I think it is ridiculous with the input lag, with the aforementioned issues with player motion, with online lag. It makes it even harder, but even offline, there's still those issues. I'd still prefer having that perfect window for guaranteed makes, a small guaranteed window, almost perfect releases having that very high percentage, slightly early late for a decent chance of success, basically a realistic shooting percentage. Worst timing is a miss or very, very low percentage. If nothing else, I'd like this approach to be offline. If they're going to make that harsh approach online, make that toxic wasteland of the online scene even more toxic, I don't think it should be. I think it should be accessible for online gamers. But if you're going to do it, make it online so I don't have to worry about it. Make offline accessible. Make offline customizable. I'd like to have green or miss be an option, quite frankly, a special challenge option. But if it can't be, make it superstar, make it Hall of Fame, all-star and lower, get rid of green or miss. Have that fair approach to timing. Like you said, it just doesn't feel good. It's not accessible. It's really turned me off the game.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of green or miss. I'm not really a fan of greens in general, the way it works now. The next improvement I would like to see is better stealing and blocking system. So playing defense in NBA 2K26, much like offense, feels canned. And press steal to foul is once again an issue. I feel like they need to implement a system like they had in NBA 2K17, where if the offensive player is holding the ball with two hands and you swipe at the right time, a steal animation plays out where you can get that steal and head the other way. How awesome were some of those animations in 2K17, Andrew, where somebody wasn't protecting the ball, they're just standing there holding it in front of them, and you swipe at the right time and you can knock the ball up in the air, right? Then grab it out of the air and get down the other way on a fast break like in real life. Or you can knock the ball down to the floor and then you can get it that way. That is awesome. And some of those great steal animations are also in a game that came out, a little over 20 years ago, NBA Live 06. Excellent steal animations in that game. But in NBA 2K26, the only way to get a steal on the ball is by awkwardly and unrealistically placing your body on the side of the offensive player while he is mid-dribble and hitting the steal button, which usually has your body and arms or hands going through the ball. But sometimes you knock it away. Other times your body and hands go through the ball and the player just keeps his dribble. Furthermore, blocking shots often feels floaty and canned at times and heavily badge reliant. So I think the blocking system in the game is stronger than the steal system. But yeah, I think that whole steal system they have in place right now on the ball needs to be scrapped for a new system. That is my opinion.
Totally. And again, this is another issue that is born of catering to the online scene because, we don't want it to be too easy to strip the ball online, which I understand, but this has really negatively impacted offline gameplay to the point where you're playing with some of the best pickpockets in league history when you're playing with the classic teams, the retro rosters, or currently some of the best defenders, some of the best on-ball defenders, and you can't strip the ball. You can't have those great steals, like you said, where you knock it up in the air, there's a bit of a battle for the loose ball, leaping for that loose ball that you've knocked up into the air, taking off on the break for that tremendous finish. Yeah, the steal mechanics are very disappointing. Press steal to foul. It's been happening for too long, pretty much this whole generation. It has happened in previous generations as well. I don't think it's ever been worse. They absolutely need a better system there.
Yeah, another improvement I'd like to see is related to player movement in general. So in 2K26, the players are often moving in a herky-jerky fashion. Some would call it janky, where animation transitions do not appear to be well put together. Changing directions often looks and feels awkward. It was quite a bit smoother, Andrew, in games like NBA 2K17, NBA 2K16, even in NBA 2K19, where yes, there was more skating, poor foot planning and whatnot. Yeah, still less janky movement, more smooth transitions and animations and whatnot. And what they've done with the player movement hasn't added more control to the user or more realism, etc. It just looks poor and feels poor on the sticks.
Yeah, like I said, there's that mixture of feeling heavy and looking floaty. Doesn't look good or feel good to me. Throw in the input delay, the lack of responsiveness to the controller. I just don't like the way players move and handle on the virtual hardwood in NBA 2K this generation. Once again, I don't think there's going to be a huge improvement until they make that switch to the engine. And even then, like I said, if they design it the same way, the technology doesn't matter. It is the design principles. But I hope there is some improvement in this regard in NBA 2K27.
Yeah, another improvement I would like to see is related to the alley-oop meter. I think that the alley-oop meter needs to go. Or if you're going to have the alley-oop meter, at least make it so that there's only one button that you need to push to finish the alley-oop. So in NBA 2K25, it was the shoot button. So as the receiver, you would always push the shoot button in order to try to time the catch and flush on the oop. But on the higher difficulty levels for NBA 2K26, they made it so the button could be Y when you jump, it could be B, it could be A, etc. Again, I'm talking Xbox buttons. But I think that if you're going to put a mechanic in there for catching and finishing alley-oops, it should only be tied to that one button, so the shoot button. And number two, there should also be an option for us to turn the meter off because it is big. It looks ridiculous on the screen. It ruins the way highlights look. It ruins the feel, too, because you're no longer watching the player, you're watching a meter. So I'd love the option to also turn the meter off.
Yeah, I have that down as one of my biggest issues as well. You know how I feel about that alley-oop timing. I feel that it is false difficulty, basically. I would love to be able to turn that meter off, at least, again, in offline play. If you want to enforce this stuff in online play, again, I don't think you should. I think it makes it less accessible, but fair enough. If you want to be elitist in the online scene, I guess that's what the scene is all about. Offline, we should have the options. So give us the option to turn off the timing, and to that point, the meter, if you do want to have the timing, but not ruin the presentation. And I know that is a huge deal for you and your brothers.
Yeah, well, they're not elite. Online players are not more elite or more skilled than offline players.
No, elitist,
Let's just
maybe.
get that out of the way right now, because the defense is 100 times worse online with real players. I'll say it again, and I would argue this until I take my last breath. Players that are playing on the higher difficulty levels against the PC or even on like pro and whatnot are dealing oftentimes with far better defense than what people online are playing against. I see that action.
Proven.
I see how ridiculous. Yeah, I see how ridiculous it is. They're not more elite, and they're certainly not more skilled. There's obviously a lot of players who play online who are very good at the game, but the same exact thing can be said for offline players. There's also a lot of online players that suck at the game. They're not very good, and that can also be the same for offline players. So I just want to get that out of the way. The last improvement that I'd like to see that I wanted to bring up is make the gameplay better with the default settings out of the box. And I alluded to this earlier. But what I mean is someone can jump right into Play Now or My Team and have a solid experience. Maybe they want to jump into a My NBA, etc. The game has to play better without tweaks, because that's the way most players play. And there's so many modes that you can't mess with sliders. Anyway, my team in NBA 2K26 was miserable to me. And the reason is because I would jump into my team and I would get some players, for example, Vince Carter, etc., and I would throw them on the floor and they would play like crap. They would be sluggish. They couldn't really pull off any moves. It was a terrible experience. And, you go back to a game like NBA 2K22 and NBA 2K23, and that My Team experience was more enjoyable. And I spent a lot of hours on My Team in both of those games playing domination and uploading highlights to YouTube. You can go back on the NLSC YouTube and watch those highlights. The game played far better out of the box by default on NBA 2K22 and NBA 2K23, and that made the My Team experience much more enjoyable. In turn, that would make the other experiences, people playing My Career, people playing, online against others, it's going to make that experience more enjoyable because the default engine is better. And the thing with My Team, too, is that also goes along with the retro players not being made accurately. Right? You put a team together with Daryl Dawkins and Vince Carter, a big dunker like Desmond Mason, et cetera, and you throw them on the floor, and none of them are playing like their real-life counterpart because the classic players are so undercooked, underdone, rushed. There's no care with that content, really. So that's also going to hurt that My Team experience. So obviously, one of my wishes is that they put more time into making those rosters accurate, get somebody on those rosters that cares, get somebody working on those players to make them, feel great on the sticks and play like their real life counterpart. That might take hiring a person or two that actually gives a crap about that content.
Yeah.
A person or people that know their history or are willing to learn history before editing those players. But I still think that at the end of the day, this content is going to be rushed and similar to what we saw in 2K26. But I just want the game to play stronger out of the box.
Yeah, and when you can't customize the game, whether it is editing the rosters to fix inaccuracies or adjusting the sliders, you're stuck. Because people can say, well, just make those edits. Well, that's fine for my NBA eras. That's fine for Play Now, etc. But in My Career, My Team, to your point, can't be done. And you've brought up the importance of being a great experience out of the box before, because as you've noted before, Derek, on previous shows, and it is absolutely true, a lot of people don't mess with the sliders. And while it's great to have the sliders, I'm glad we have them, not everybody's going to mess with them. And furthermore, you shouldn't have to mess with them to have a pretty good experience. And yeah, it's hard to cater to everybody in the world. Every person that's going to get their hands on the game, you can't guarantee that every setting is going to be right for them, but you have some consistency. You have that telemetry data that says, how are people editing the sliders? How are people enjoying the game? You can make tweaks based off of that. So yeah, I 100% agree. You need to have those default settings, that default tuning, pretty good. Make it a great experience out of the box, and especially in those modes where you can't do anything about it with any slider tweaks.
Yeah, and like I stated, I think that there are many past 2Ks that played great without any tweaks. And that's how they gained the reputation of being the best in the space, right? That's one of the ways that they overtook NBA Live. Also, EA Sports didn't help with the NBA Live series by making poor playing NBA Lives and, starting with the Xbox 360 generation and then not improving enough on PS4 gen to really make a splash and overtake some of that market share. But yeah, there are many NBA 2Ks in the past, in the 2010s, some in the 2000s, that just play awesome right when you turn them on. You jump into a game or you jump into a season, and it's like, yeah, this is really good pick up and play basketball. And they've really gone away from that over the last couple of years.
For sure. And again, another thing that's been really turning me off the game this generation. My final thoughts on gameplay. The general gameplay philosophy that I'd like NBA 2K27 and future games to have. Offline play should focus on simulation and authenticity while still being fun. How many times, Derek, do we go back to older games, NBA 2K9, NBA 2K10, a couple of generations ago, and we're struck by how realistic is this? How sim is this? How authentic is this game, despite coming out, over a decade ago, despite coming out on inferior technology to what we have today? Catering to online play has taken the focus away from that. I know that online play is important, but to that point, online play has also become very toxic. It's less fun as well. If online play is going to be more difficult, fine, I guess. It should also be accessible as well. But offline play should be striving for simulation, authenticity, fun, and also be customizable.
So yeah, from a feature and mode standpoint, I'll go over this real quick and then you can jump in before we get to the community responses to this week's community question. I would love to see more attention to detail placed into the classic team and player content. So I alluded to this earlier. Just more attention paid to my NBA eras, the classic teams, the all-time teams. In turn, that would make the My Team mode that much more enjoyable, that much more pick up and play. I'd also like to see them bring court, jersey, and team creator into the offline space outside of my NBA. So basically, giving us the ability to create jerseys, courts, relocate teams, name the team, put players on the roster, and then create rosters offline doing that. And then be able to share all of that content and those rosters with other people online. So that would be really cool. I'd also like to see WNBA Classic teams. The league has now been around for close to 30 years. That's viable now. And if not classic teams, maybe a free agent pool of classic players, legends, etc. People like Lisa Leslie and Cheryl Swoops and Cynthia Cooper. And now you could throw Maya Moore in there because she retired early and whatnot, and she was a hell of a player. So, Diana Taurasi recently retired. Maybe you can grab her now off of that legends pool. So, yeah, those are some of the things that I'd like to see.
A legends pool, which NBA Live has done, and 2K hasn't done, that would be great for both NBA and WNBA. I'll obviously throw out Lauren Jackson as well, being an Australian for WNBA legends that I'd love to see in the game in some capacity. Yeah, that is my big thing with features, with content, fixing the ratings, striving for authenticity in the era's rosters. Look, if they have to use some community edits that have been made in the past couple of years, do it. It's their game, it's their rosters. If they need to copy the homework of people in the community that have improved those rosters, so be it. We shouldn't have to make those fixes to those eras rosters every year or wait for someone else to do it just to have viable throwback rosters to start my NBA eras. I don't want to downplay the great work that's gone into my NBA eras, Derek, because it is fantastic, but without those authentic rosters, without that attention to detail, and of course, as you said, this also applies to players in my team as well, but without that authenticity, those rosters aren't as fun to play with. And me, leaning into retro as I am, nostalgia, I want to play with those rosters. I want to start with the Jordan era.
Yeah, and the last piece I want to bring up, it's very important, is less microtransactions and less gambling mechanics. I think that it's just gotten ridiculous. I'm seeing people spend hundreds of dollars and state that they feel like they have to in order to enjoy the game. We even had Nate Stasho, friend of the show, Live 01 Legend, state that he had to get up to about a 94 overall to really enjoy the online experience with NBA 2K26. Sometimes people are spending thousands of dollars early on in order to get their player to a point where they can enjoy them online, so the game is more fun on the sticks. People stating that they're spending that kind of money in order to order packs so they can be competitive in my team online to create a better player roster to try to get their favorite player. I think it's just gotten out of control. The company makes far more money off of microtransactions and these gambling mechanics than they do for the sale of the base game. And I find that incredibly troubling. And it also tells me that they're not going to go away from this. In fact, they're only going to try to get more out of it. Right. So, yeah, an improvement I would like to see is less gambling mechanics, less microtransactions. But yeah, I don't think we're going to see that.
Yeah, that's on my list as well, because it's always worth putting out there. It's always worth criticizing, but it is working, to your point, so they're probably not going to move away from that. And it's unfortunate because people will say, oh, just don't spend money, which obviously a lot of people don't. It is the whales that really support these systems. We know that. But it makes it an inferior experience if you don't. My career is a weaker experience grinding up as it's become more and more expensive to upgrade your player. My team has become more miserable as they've introduced these broken cards, these OP cards, and given them terrible pack odds to encourage people to just rip open packs, to dump money into this mode. And anybody going no money spent is just trying to get by with whatever cards they have. It just ruins the competitive scene. Again, they talk about the competitive scene and the purity of competition, and yet you've got pay to win or pay to enhance your player or your team, whatever. So yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to get much better, but yeah, like you, I'll absolutely always say, please be a bit fairer to the gamer. I'll criticize it and throw it out there. You know, we mentioned the authenticity with My NBA eras and the rosters, and that is an issue that they absolutely need to address. Also, other errors with authenticity, mismatched branding not changing when it should, things like that. It's been a few years now, and some of these issues do persist. And it's disappointing because one of the reasons that 2K overtook NBA Live was not only the superior on-court experience, as you pointed out, but also the attention to detail with modes. You know, NBA Live brought in franchise first, then 2K brought in franchise, NBA Live revamped with Dynasty, NBA 2K revamped with the Association 2.0 in NBA 2K9, I want to say. They really did that first big revamp of the Association, My GM, My League, My NBA eras. So they've gone from strength to strength, but it has reached a point where they're not really enhancing that mode that much anymore. Or at least there's so many details that could be improved. Again, that lack of attention to detail, I'd really like to see them improve on that. And yes, once again, you can make some of those changes yourself and fix them, but you shouldn't have to. You're advertising this mode as doing these things, as evolving over the years to match the real NBA. Again, these inaccuracies in the rosters and within the branding and other aspects of My NBA eras have been going on for a few years now. So, yeah, it absolutely needs to be resolved.
Yeah, well, I also want to point out, too, that if you don't enjoy the gameplay, it doesn't matter if everything was accurate with My NBA eras. And I think that that's very important to note. They can have all the content in the world in this game, but if the gameplay isn't up to snuff and people get more frustration with it than enjoyment, then, yeah, that's always going to be a problem. So, lastly, I want to say this about the microtransactions and gambling mechanics. The game is designed with a grind in order to have people feel compelled to spend money, right? That's the way I look at it. That's the way I see it. And when I say spend money, I mean spend a lot more over the price of the base game. And that's not okay with me. That doesn't sit well with me. I feel bad for the people that feel like they have to put money into these games. And unfortunately, the target crowd is teenagers, right? Kids. And young adults, some still in school, some in college, etc. And that's sad to me.
Oh, absolutely. No, the goodwill is gone. 2K used to be the darling of the basketball gaming space when NBA 2K overtook NBA Live, was giving us that great on-court experience, these great modes, and obviously they are still pleasing a lot of people with the gameplay. They do have these modes, but the greed is just out of control in my career and my team. And, like you say, it's designed that way. So it is an inferior experience if you choose not to pay. And it simply shouldn't be. I will throw out a few more quick suggestions before we get to the community responses. As far as My NBA eras, a lot of people have mentioned this, having different starting points. Even if you can just change the beginning year and use a custom roster, that'd be really cool. Fix up small issues that are important for presentation, such as removing the year from the team names in those eras rosters. Very distracting in the presentation. People have mentioned that as well. Looks like a roster issue. They haven't changed it. Like you said, more fairness in my team and my career. Unlikely as it is. I'd love to see offline my career, something that caters to people who just want that traditional experience and that's still going to be available when the servers are offline. Because look how disposable games have become, Derek, unfortunately. And finally, a few odds and ends. Presentation and atmosphere settings like NBA Live. As I said on a previous show, very surprised that they haven't borrowed that idea yet. I'd love them to borrow that idea and put that in NBA 2K27 and future games. You've brought up some great ideas for roster editing. I'll also throw out the ability to enter draft information and access all biodata when creating and editing players. Also the ability to edit all-star teams. And finally, Derek, when we start up the game, no lengthy first boot sequences, no jumping into the My Career story straight away, or have to play a My Team game. You know, if you're going to do that, at least let us exit out and skip that game immediately. You know, allow us to get into the game and choose what we want to play.
So let's get to this week's community responses to this week's community question. I asked basketball gamers, what improvements would you like to see in NBA 2K27? Andrew, at Andrew the X, stated, I'd love to see green or miss be removed. I would love to also see a throwback controller option like they did around NHL 14. I'd like an option to be able to turn off shot meter and time-based mechanics on the peak of jump shots with attributes and defensive coverage affecting make or miss.
Yeah, I think green or miss has been very destructive, and it hasn't been the skill-based mechanic that a lot of people claim it to be.
T. Gentry at Bucky_T states, better foot planning, less robotic feel, and more loose control, etc. He continues, 2K14 type of graphics and 2K27 would be fine for me. People loving those 2K14 PS4 gen graphics, Andrew. And lastly, more love put into eras modes, and he would also like to see a FIBA mode. He states better presentation similar to NBA Live titles, need more crowd interaction, especially in big moments.
Yeah, that has been the big thing as well with the graphics of this generation. People still point to 2K14 as the pinnacle. Really shouldn't be the case, a generation later.
And I agree with him. I talked about it earlier, better foot planning, less robotic field, more loose control. Yeah, the game needs to be better on the sticks. It needs less input delay. It needs more control in the user's hands, etc. And we did receive one more response on X. It was actually sent to me via DM. It was from PhilLime2002 at PhilLime2K. It is an incredibly long response to this week's community question, and there's a lot of thought put into it, and I agree with the majority of what he's saying, and it reflects my experience with the game and definitely some improvements that I would like to see. But due to time constraints, I'm not going to be able to read that out on this show. However, I'm thinking that on a future episode, as we get closer to release, we are going to reference Phil Lime 2K's post. And maybe I'll read the whole thing out in full because I think there's a lot of good stuff in there.
Touches on a lot of great points. Absolutely. Including the fact that despite the supposed focus on skill-based mechanics, a lot of the mechanics don't work properly. They're kind of broken. So you're asking people to be skillful with controls that don't work. Or contest systems, systems under the hood that don't work properly. What's a gamer to do?
Yeah, he's talking a lot about heavy animations, animation delays, input delay, meter issues where, it will get green at one point. Say you're pulling back for a dunk or shooting a shot, and then all of a sudden that green window goes away, but it doesn't make sense that it went away. So you'll either brick that shot or you'll brick that dunk, etc. Just a lot of good points in there. So like I said, maybe I'll be able to read that out on a future show. So did we receive any other responses on other social media platforms?
We did indeed, Derek. Some people weighing in on Threads, Blue Sky, and Facebook. Going to start out with Threads. Bob Dylan _329, presumably not the real Bob Dylan, Derek, but you never know, says, quality of life improvements for my league/my GM. Let us select more than one team to use when playing with a friend. Real life courts for blacktop. Let us upload our rosters into the playoff mode. Bring back playing the career of a real life NBA player, which they had that separate mode for a few years there where you could use the real player in the my career mode, and keep shooting the way it is, but make defense more rewarding. And I agree with the quality of life improvements. As I said, Derek, I would change shooting because I don't like green or miss. But to that point, this is why it's important to have customizable gameplay offline so that he could have the shooting mechanics that he wants and we can have the shooting mechanics that we want.
Yeah, two things. One, I think it's absolutely ridiculous that through the majority of this game cycle, if not all, the number one best shot to take in NBA 2K26, online or offline, was a step back. That's not realistic. Those are not the highest percentage shots in real life. Those should not be the go-to shot all the time in order to get a good look, etc. I think that shooting is pretty poor, the mechanics in general, on NBA 2K26 and incredibly unrealistic. As it relates to blacktop, I'd love to see more attention in blacktop in general. I'd love to see some courts. Right now there's only one. I'd love to see, maybe 4 or 5 different courts to choose from and just a little bit more love and care into that mode because I think that more people would play it.
And we used to have that, multiple courts in blacktop. But now, of course, that's live service content. So that's where the focus is, sadly. Jumping over to Blue Sky, Rancid, at Vindicator Lulamoon, says, in my opinion, we need more plays for eras mode and time-accurate stuff, like not allowing two-way deals before 2017 or no G League before 2001. And like I said, Derek, I'd love to see more attention to detail in my NBA eras. Gameplay is paramount. As you said, if you're not enjoying the on-court experience, the detail in the mode is kind of a moot point. But with that being said, this mode has been around for a few years. They're definitely committed to having that multi-era experience, and there is a lot of era-appropriate authenticity already. So, yeah, I agree with those suggestions.
Make those rosters a priority and get a person or people on those classic teams and players that actually know their history and know basketball.
And jumping over to Facebook, Charles says, I only ask for simple things, and I've been asking this for approximately 6 to 7 years. Give us every camera angle that is available so that I can use it online. No reason for Skybox to not be available. Mentions that it's his favourite camera angle, and since he can't use it, he's been having to use half court. Also, I'm tired of playing randoms in salary cap. In my team, let me pick who I want to play. There's 130 people online. Let me pick who I want to play and let the records count. It used to be like that for Madden back in the day. You pick what side of the country someone was on, and you can play them. Also, he's mainly a salary cap my team player. So yeah, having those options, having that accessibility in those modes, some of the design choices they've opted for in recent years, Derek, I think have turned people off some of their favourite modes.
Yeah, the camera view piece. So I still want a reliable ISO cam that works similar to what we had in the old NBA Live series, but also like the crowd cam that's in NBA 2K8. There's also the camera called 200 level that's, for example, in NBA 2K11 for PS2 and some of those other PS2 NBA 2Ks. And it's a great ISO view that pans appropriately following the action and whatnot. Yeah, it would be nice to have an actual reliable ISO cam, because I think that's a great way to play and also a great way to capture footage.
Jose says another Hall of Fame where you can unlock old NBA jersey designs, awards, etc. Sounds kind of like the old Hall of Fame in NBA Live, Derek. Also, preseason games for my NBA and my league and my career. No AI players in online. Easier said than done. As we talked about with NBA The Run last week, Derek, when somebody drops or they need to fill in when there's no user, got to fill in somehow, unfortunately. But I do understand that those AI players can be frustrating. Jamal says more simulation gameplay for 5-on-5 quick play. That goes back to what I said about gameplay philosophy, Derek. Having that offline experience, try to be sim and authentic, and fun, of course. The online play is going to be what it's going to be, but for those of us who do prefer to play offline, whether it's solo, whether it's multiplayer, as you do, either head-to-head or co-op, yeah, we want it to be more like those NBA 2Ks that just blew us away with their authenticity, Derek.
Yeah, but Andrew, basketball is basketball. That's why sometimes this bothers me in general, because the online mechanics as they aren't working for people now. As in, there's more complaints than there is positivity about them. And it's still basketball that you're trying to have people control in their hands. So you should be able to make the online scene with the individual player control. You should be able to still have that reflected in offline and for it to work, right? Like I stated, the online scene was plagued by a lot of the same issues that was happening in the offline scene. And these are things that shouldn't have been in either scene. And that's the point I'm trying to make. Making it so that online, the highest percentage shot was a step back, an off-balanced shot, where shooting straight up and down wasn't as viable, wasn't as reliable, even like a completely wide open straight up and down shot. Making it so attacking the rim was something that wasn't even close to as reliable as those stupid step backs. That was something that was going on in both the offline and online scene, and it doesn't belong in either of them. I think the gameplay needs to be sound as it relates to basketball in general, and it could work in both modes.
Absolutely. This is a basketball game, not a fighting game, as you pointed out many times on previous shows. We have a couple more here. Carlos says NBA 2K12 remastered, says he loves the showcase mode. And yeah, I think a lot of people do want some kind of offline historical challenge mode.
Yeah, I mean, they have all of the licenses for something like this, right? They have all of that content now in the game as it relates to players and teams and stuff like that. I just think that so much of that content is rushed. I'd be worried about how a mode like that would play.
And finally, Renee says, I like Derek's idea to create and share teams. Also, it would be nice to have international teams like NBA Live 10 did. The FIBA teams, of course, Derek. And I can't ever have enough classic content. I'm mainly a play now player. And as somebody who is really leaning into retro, leaning into nostalgia, Derek, I'm all for adding more retro content. I want it to be done well, of course, not to harp on the point, but we do need to see more attention to detail, more authenticity in the classic teams, my NBA era's rosters, plus anything else they do with classic content. But yeah, I'm all for more retro content being added.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. He remembered me bringing that up from a past NLSC show where I discussed, an offline team creator feature. Bring the My NBA court creator, jersey creator, all of that stuff into the full offline scene and allow people to put rosters together using it, and then they can share them with people. I think that would be really cool. So thank you to everybody who answered this week's community question. Yeah, we hope that NBA 2K27 is an improvement over 2K26. If it's somewhat the same, Andrew, my brothers and I will still probably get a couple 100 hours out of it because of the way we play, because of the co-op experience, etc., both with the NBA and WNBA. But I'm less optimistic for you.
Yeah. I will keep an open mind. I will try to enjoy it. I'm not going to go in sour, hoping that I hate it. I'd rather not spend money on a game and not like it after all. And loving basketball and basketball gaming as I do want it to succeed. And even if it doesn't please me, I hope that other people enjoy the game, obviously. But fingers crossed that some of our wishes can be granted. Some of them I feel more optimistic about than others, but always worth throwing out these suggestions and constructive feedback, Derek. But with that being said, that has brought us to the end of this week's show. Thank you for tuning in, and a reminder you can catch us every week on the NLSC, our YouTube channel, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast platforms. Also, both we and the NLSC are on social media, and would appreciate a follow. So, Derek, go ahead and plug the handles.
Yeah, you can reach me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at D43G and at D4384. I'm also on the NLSC, D43, and on YouTube, D43.
As for me, I'm Andrew in the forum, and Andrew NLSC on X and Blue Sky. The NLSC is on X, Facebook, and Blue Sky at the NLSC. We're also NLSC Basketball on Instagram and Threads. We're on YouTube at NBA Live Series Center. And of course, keep it locked to the NLSC itself, NBA-live.com, for all things basketball gaming. So, thank you again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.